It had affected both legs, it had affected both arms. My father tells me that even my neck couldn't stand up, so I was just like a yo-yo.
People were looking down on us quite a lot, you know, that they were saying, because these are the girls, nobody will marry them or they won't be able to function normally in the community.
The last epidemics of polio occurred in the UK in the late 50s, early 60s. Worldwide, polio is still a very significant problem, so the pattern elsewhere outside of the UK is very different to what we see in the UK, although it is changing as people move into the UK from overseas.
There are approximately 120,000 people living with the late effects of polio and post-polio syndrome in the UK today. The British Polio Fellowship is a charity dedicated to helping, supporting and empowering those affected by this neurological condition. 2014 marks the 75th anniversary of the British Polio Fellowship, and in this film we will hear from polio sufferers, health professionals and finally from the fellowship itself and what it still hopes to offer for the next 75 years.
John caught polio on his 17th birthday. He became totally paralysed, couldn't breathe at all. He was in an iron lung for about 5 or 6 years, and he wanted to try a different kind of ventilator, which is called a cuirass, which is basically a tight-fitting shell that fits over the chest. John survived for 50 years being totally paralysed. Nobody expected him to live that long because it was almost unheard of. In fact, the year before he died, he was featured in the Guinness or the World Records book as being the longest survivor.
People think polio is something of the past, but it isn't. It's still around, and there are many people that have polio that have Parkinson's, and people know about Parkinson's, but they don't know a thing about polio.
When I started to develop these things that I now know were post-polio, when I was falling and forgetting things and all sorts of things, I had to find out what was wrong with me because doctors didn't know.
I didn't know about it till about 20 years ago when I was doing an interview with the then Mayor of Merton, who was in a wheelchair. And he first told me about post-polio syndrome, and of course I've since researched it and realised that it is very probable that if I don't already have it, there's a very good chance that at some point in my life I will develop it.
Most doctors, even specialist orthopaedic doctors who are under 55, have never met polio because it's virtually eradicated, isn't it, in England? So people like me are a bit of a rarity.
Older people have less energy, less this, less that, less mobility. I used to walk with just one stick and a caliper. Look at me now, you know, it's just slowly downhill.
None of us want to be disabled, and if we are disabled and we're disabled to a point where we're unable to work, we should expect the government to help us with our financial concerns to actually be able to have a life.
Polio no longer has the same presence in the public's mind, but the fellowship still has much to offer its members.
It's a membership organisation, and the members of the organisation are our lifeblood. We have something like about 8,000 members at the moment, and they take a full part in the organisation at local level, branch level, regional level, and indeed the fellowship itself is run by trustees elected from the membership, and indeed 75% of those people have to have had polio in the past, so we're grounded by the people who have actually contracted polio.
I don't have any memories before I have any memories about the polio fellowship. My dad was involved from the mid-60s branch level, and then he became national chairman in the late 70s and did 2 long stints as national chairman. So all the way through my growing up, we were actively and heavily involved, you know, in the whole of the polio fellowship's activities.
I was brought up in a non-polio environment. Although I had polio a year after I was born in East Africa, in Uganda, I had to mix with the able-bodied all the time. So there was never such an organisation where I could relate to people who had the similar challenges. So when I came across British Polio, I found it very helpful. It was very soothing to hear other people in a similar predicament.
I had read in a newspaper about post-polio and knew from years back the founder of the Scottish network, and she encouraged me to join both the Polio Fellowship and the post-polio network. And it was only through talking to others that I realised what was happening to me was the same as them.
I'm not a joiner of things anyway, and I didn't just want to join something because I had some illness that was what other people had. I thought, I'm not going to have anything in common with these people. But when I did join the BPF and went to meetings, I found that there were lots of very interesting people who I wouldn't have met in any other circumstances.
One is aware that medically, that some of the symptoms and some of the difficulties that people face are exacerbated by the fact, as old age comes on, this syndrome, which is what it is, I think becomes more and more difficult. And I think over the last probably 10 to 15 years, it has been, clearly scientifically and medically proven that there is the late effects of polio that come back to make life tougher.
Polio sufferers have struggled at times with being correctly diagnosed, but there are specialist centres and an increasing medical acceptance of post-polio syndrome.
Patients find that the medical profession don't really know very much about post-polio syndrome, and sometimes people actually find it's quite hard to convince medical professionals that it exists as a syndrome in its own right. So it can be quite difficult for patients to get themselves heard and therefore get the treatment that they need.
The post-polio syndrome is a difficult diagnosis. There is no doubt you need a history of having had polio in the past in order to make a diagnosis of post-polio syndrome. But unfortunately, because there's no specific test, it makes the diagnosis more clinical than it does using investigation to confirm your clinical findings.
You usually have residual effects from the polio, and now later in life they would have had a stable period, and then later on they're presenting with new symptoms, the three main ones being pain, weakness and also fatigue.
The Lane Fox Unit has highly skilled and specialist therapists who are invaluable in managing the long-term problems that these patients present to us. And I would mention particularly the occupational therapy service and the physiotherapy service for Lane Fox, who certainly in my clinical practice have been extremely important and useful in terms of dealing with patients' problems.
A patient who had polio, an 80% chance of developing post-polio syndrome, which typically results in a disability of some kind, often lower limb, some spinal, which means that they need either a brace or a support to help them in their general mobility or maybe to reduce pain. The role of the orthotics panel was really to try and advise the fellowship on how the provision of orthotics to people with PPS could be improved, because there was strong feedback from the members that services were very inconsistent across the UK. So we've got quite a task on in terms of educating quite a few groups of people about PPS.
There's better technology becoming available. So the provision of splints and orthoses and the analysis of disorders of walking can now be undertaken in a much more measured way, and we're expecting to see that translated into clinical practice over the next few years.
We've set up the post-polio syndrome programme. This is a multidisciplinary residential course that supports patients with post-polio syndrome and focuses on the condition, and indeed the research programme that ran alongside this has showed an improvement in quality of life for the patients that attend the course, which as a clinician is incredibly encouraging, because it means we have a definite treatment for these patients with debilitating conditions.
those that contracted polio back in the 50s, as I say, about 120,000 people in the UK, continue to need our help and support. So we provide support through holiday grants, through direct support through medical advice, and indeed access to all sorts of opportunities which they may not normally have received.
We've got grants that we give for holidays or equipment. We've got a section for support so that if people phone in, they can get help with being signposted to the right place. I think the things that our members appreciate is the support that they get in being able to get advice, particularly at this time when there's so much worry about benefits and welfare.
There's sort of two main benefits that people are worrying about at the moment. One is personal independence payment, which is replacing disability living allowance. And whilst that's not come in for the majority of people yet, people are very, very worried that they're going to lose their Motability cars when it does come in. The other benefit that's causing problems is employment and support allowance. So a lot of people who are currently on incapacity benefit are now being migrated across. Now the forms of these benefits are absolutely huge and very intimidating for a lot of people, and it's very helpful for our benefits advisor to be able to talk them through the process.
The experts panel, as it says on the tin, are experts in their field, neurologists, physiotherapists, OTs, etc., who come together and look at what the current state of play is around polio and how we can actually move that forward, and around education.
At the moment, the National Institute for Clinical Excellence, NICE, don't currently have any guidance for PPS. So our panel of experts is creating these guidelines. And this is a very important project, because what we're hoping that it will do is to highlight or to raise awareness about post-polio syndrome within the medical world, if you like, because many general practitioners are not aware of the existence of post-polio syndrome.
In the Fellowship's 75th year, communicating with members remains as critical as ever, as does the need to find support from other organisations.
A main mode of actually communication is through the bulletin, which is produced every couple of months and issued to all our members. But obviously what we're trying to do as well is move more into social networking, Facebook, Twitter, and obviously we've got our website. But the bulletin is the main method of communication from central office. But of course there's also the local networks as well, so there is face-to-face contact at branch level, regional level, and so on and so forth. Very much a network.
I've always, got the bulletin. I've been a life member since I think I was, 17. We saw the chairman's appeal come through a couple of editions ago, saying, look, the bulletin costs money. It's a difficult thing to keep providing, and therefore could people contribute? And I took the proposition to our charity committee here at the Premier League, and it found resonance with them as something they'd like to do. And so we are going to fund it for the next 3 years to the cost of printing and producing. The bulletin will be funded by us, and it's just nice to be able to do that.
It's vital that we get organisations and businesses on board with us as part of their corporate social responsibility, and we're grateful for people like the Premier League, Mondays, Syngenta Seeds, all those people that are currently working with us in our 75th year to spread the word.
The job isn't over yet. There's still going to be people with very high level needs who will continue to need help, especially those who are getting older with the condition. And added to that, it's quite likely we're going to see technological and clinical advances that will need to be translated into practice, and somebody needs to be an advocate for that work, and that's a very important part of the British Polio Fellowship's mission.
When I was really in trouble with my swallowing, I got in touch with the welfare officer, and she came and gave me a lot of support. Without her, I don't know what I would have done.
Well, British Polio Fellowship is one of the best things that happened to me. I did not know that there was anything like post-polio until I got to these forums where I see fellow polio people like me who have got similar conditions, and we start sharing ideas, and that's exactly what's happening to me.
The late effects of polio, post-polio syndrome, were beginning to affect me, and I was worried about it.
and I phoned the fellowship, I joined and was able to get a lot of guidance from them. Their advice service is very, very good. I don't know if enough people use it, but you know, they really can help you, and it's worth ringing them, and I've been a member ever since.
You can call the British Polio Fellowship on 0800 018 0586 or visit us at www.britishpolio.org.uk. If you would like to make a donation right now, please text BRPF 39 followed by the amount up to a maximum of £10 and send to 70070.